All right. Hello. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Hi, Ted.
Hi. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Great. Awesome. Well, Rick, thank you so much for agreeing to this interview. We've done a few of these already, and we've just been talking with the PSNY composers about how they have been managing as the kind of late stages of the current pandemic situation continues to impact what's possible, in music making in North America and beyond. A lot of composers have had different pathways and different journeys, different challenges, but also have found exciting new ways to collaborate with people, sometimes in person, sometimes remotely, sometimes with new media. So yeah, super excited to hear about how you've been and what you've been up to. I guess maybe I can just ask a general kind of personal question. I hope you don't mind if I ask a personal question, but how you personally have been. I mean, how the pandemic has kind of affected your work, what you do professionally with music, just to get a sense of where you're at.
Sure. Well, Ted, thanks so much for having me. It's great. It's great to speak with you. How have I been doing? I've been really fortunate in the sense that I haven't been sick and my family's doing okay. And so on that side, things have been really lucky. It's a huge challenge for everybody, even if you are lucky, but especially if you're not. I think for me, the thing that happened was, I lost all my performing because I perform a lot as well, and that was all gone. And so I didn't interact with like my colleagues and close friends and ensemble. And I didn't realize to what extent that always fueled my compositions.
Hmm.
And so I got disoriented. I mean, there was like early on in the pandemic. I remember in April, I got obsessed with writing music for two octave keyboard metronome. I ended up writing a big orchestra piece all like in a month. It was very productive. And then there were like 5 months that goes by and nothing happens because I wasn't having that kind of interactive stimulation. Um, so that was really interesting, and I'm still kind of working through some of that stuff. The other thing that happened was before the pandemic, I started branching out compositionally into kind of two worlds. I started developing graphic scores and an abstract way of composing, which has to do a lot more with interpreters, improvisation, and interactivity with musicians, as well as my fully notated works.
Hmm.
So once the pandemic hit, that split kind of took its own paths.
Hmm,
So
interesting. Yeah, I definitely want to talk more about the graphics course because you sent me a few and I've looked at them and they look really amazing. Um, but I know that you've also been working with dancers, and I'm just curious to hear a bit about what that has been like actually in terms of like rehearsals and physically,
right.
but also just conceptually thinking about a lot of composers that I've talked to have been thinking about physicality, connection, and distance in their work. I know that a lot of your work has been ongoing for a number of years, like well before 2020 happened. But yeah, I just would love to hear some more about the work you've been doing with dancers.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm very excited by writing music for dance. There's something that's like very stimulating about it. I don't actually compose in the room with the dancers. I don't interact that much with the dancers, with the choreographer. I've been working for 7 or 8 years now with Miro Magloire and the New Chamber Ballet. And we've been, for the last 4 or 5 years, developing an evening length piece. It started with a piece called Trust, which includes my violin piece in flow. And then a few years ago, we did a travelogue of haunting places,
Mm.
which is 5 of my piano preludes. And then just recently, last month, we premiered the whole evening length piece, which is called Sea, based on all these kind of journeys you get through to via water. And the final piece is a 22-minute piece called The Mill, which is for violin and piano. And so I was really excited. This piece finally got premiered last month, and I was able to attend. It was it was pretty stimulating. I think one of the things that excites me about writing for music for dance is, as a composer, when you write music, you don't often think about dance. You kind of think about notes, you think about sound, you think about timbre, you think about maybe physical gesture of the performers. Dancers always think about music. They're
Mm.
always thinking about it. And so it's really exciting to be in a world where there's such a codependency. And that's a very stimulating place to be as a composer when you think about how much the music is kind of giving and taking and interacting with the other collaborators at that level. So
Hmm.
that's a really exciting, it's a different interaction than when you're interacting with performers, which we're more used to doing. So I love writing for dance. I find it really exciting. Miro and I have an interesting way of collaborating, which is, since we've known each other for quite some time now and collaborated on other pieces outside of these, um, we collaborate very independently of one another. So we'll talk a lot, but then I'll send him the piece and then he'll choreograph the piece. So there is a lot, to quote our first collaboration, there is a lot of trust involved. It
Hmm.
actually came about because I was in Rwanda the first time we did a true collaboration, and I didn't have actually access to internet that
Hmm.
was stable enough to collaborate with him regularly. So we had just a lot of trust built into how we collaborated, and that kind of continued with how we collaborate still today.
Yeah. What was the premiere like? I mean, was it in kind of like a traditional, concert hall or performance space with an audience, or was it kind of filmed remotely or for remote viewing, or how did that happen?
Well, Miro's pretty amazing. He rehearsed through the whole pandemic with his dancers, and they developed a number of really beautiful videos of their pieces, including one using the piece "The Mill." You can check it out on their website. And as they finished the video, the rules of COVID changed in New York
Hmm.
City. And so in June, what happened was we did two premieres. The first one was with social distancing. Everyone was masked, but
Hmm.
there were only about 40 or 50 people in the room. Um, and the dancers were masked as well. The second one, you had a required vaccine
Hmm.
uh, to get in.
Hmm.
Everyone was still masked, but there was no social distancing. So
Hmm.
we got to experience it in two different ways, which was very interesting
Right.
and pretty exciting, I must say, to kind of just be in it. It was at the Mark Morris Theater upstairs,
Mm-hmm.
so it was very beautiful.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, so many people are coming up with different ways of making premieres happen, and the kind of double premiere or even triple premiere, if you kind of count the video,
Mm-hmm.
another kind of documentation of the work is super interesting. Um, yeah, I guess I would be curious if there are kind of any. I mean, I realize that this is a kind of a piece that you've been working on for a long time, but if the kind of philosophy or aesthetic that you brought to your compositional work in the past year or so, changed as you were farther and farther away from performance, kind of working more in physical isolation. If that had any kind of bearing on your ideas, for the piece and what kind of music you were writing.
Um, it did. I mean, I actually wrote the piece I finished the piece before the pandemic, so I didn't write it
Mhm.
during the pandemic. We just had to delay the premiere for
I
a
see. I
year.
see. Uh-huh.
But the music that I've been writing during the pandemic, I think it was just like a huge emotional kind of hump that you have to get through to say, you have to trust that this music's going to be played.
Hmm.
Even if I don't know when it's going to be played, it's going to be played somehow, somewhere. And once I got back into that, it's interesting. I got into this place where I was like a long time ago as a kid composing and not knowing who I was writing for and just
Hmm.
writing these sounds. And it took a while to get back in there, but it's a pretty good place to be creatively.
Hmm.
You can just really explore a lot of ideas.
Hmm.
Um, and I kind of got in there in a pretty deep way. So I've actually written a bunch of pieces over the pandemic that I haven't shown anyone yet.
Hmm.
I didn't feel the need to kind of like get the stuff out there and have people
Hmm.
record it on Zoom and things like that. I did do some of that. I have a new music ensemble at Berkeley where I teach, and I have a student group called Neither Nor, in fact,
Uh-huh.
and they're just a great bunch of undergrads who are super adventuresome and great
Hmm.
musicians. And we did, we spent the whole year actually like zooming at 9 p.m. at night and
Hmm.
still developing all of our work as a group. And so we would all write pieces for each other, and that was pretty exciting. So
Cool.
that was one of the things. But in general, I'd say,
Mm-hmm.
there's still a lot of pieces that I haven't shown anyone, and
Hmm.
I'm still waiting for the right time. I think
Right.
once concerts really come back, I think
Hmm.
will be the right time.
Yeah, well, speaking of like that kind of childlike or adolescent. I mean, actually, I was talking with Mary Koumjian about this also, and she was like, "Yeah, it's like I kind of went back to what I did when I was a teenager, which is just like really be in my bedroom bored and
Hmm.
come up with interesting things to write or to think about or to imagine." And I was looking at some of the graphic scores that you sent over, and I wonder if that those are kind of connected to that idea of a really kind of abstract level of thinking about performance, not necessarily sound, but all the different kind of physical, performative gestures, events, phenomena that go along with a person playing an instrument. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about the your interest in and working with graphic notation and scores, how that kind of came about. Um, what kinds of musicians you're writing for, or if you're just writing in a more abstract way.
Sure.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, great. It's interesting. It started when I was working with Iancu Dumitrescu.
Hmm.
We had invited him over with my group, Either Or, in 2016 to do a Miller Theater portrait, which I
Hmm.
was conducting. And that was pretty revolutionary working with him and Anna Maria Avram, his wife, who's since passed. And then he invited me to the Enescu Festival in Romania the following year to conduct. And Anna passed away like a month before. So I ended up writing a piece, and it was my first graphic score. I mean, he writes a particular type of graphic score, and I was writing for his ensemble. So
Hmm.
I felt like this was the right way to do it. I was pretty happy with that piece. And then with my student group, I teach a lot of graphic scores and instruction pieces, and I realized I hadn't really written that many of them. So I started writing them, and they were really hard.
Yeah.
There was like 6 months of just bringing stuff in and just not being happy with it, and
Mm.
back to the drawing board until I finally came up with this way of writing graphic scores that kind of dealt with all the parameters I thought were important and left the parameters I thought needed to be free for the interpreters that I wanted to
Hmm.
write for. So they're called graphic series lead sheets.
Okay.
And the lead sheets is like a reference to, obviously, like traditional lead sheets, but these are graphic series lead sheets, which means they're for like the improvising new music performer.
Hmm.
So for the performer today, and we've got so many great musicians today, whereas like 30 years ago, I don't think it was the same level of intensity with the crossover between improvisation and
Hmm.
notation. Of course, there was lots, but I just feel like there's a lot more now, and this is really the norm. And so
Hmm.
these scores are for people who are great performers who can read anything, but also have a sensitivity to be able to kind of follow a score and improvise and enhance music in certain ways.
Hmm.
And so these graphic series lead sheets, the things that I focus on here is like, how do you create pretty intense chamber music in a graphic notation environment?
Hmm.
How do you create that intensity that we have in traditional new music ensembles,
Hmm.
but where people are free to interpret things as scratch tones or melodies or
Hmm.
whatever else they might want to bring into the piece at that point.
So, looking at like the colors and shapes, my mind kind of went to, what Adelio Smith or Anthony Braxton, other, musicians, composers who have really come up with a way of not graphically representing sound, but making a graphical object that is its own kind of philosophy or its own world, is kind of self-contained, not necessarily a score to follow, but I think what Dada Leo Smith said, it's like a door that you can kind of go through. It's like a kind of an invitation. But hearing that, it's kind of more hearing the term lead sheet in the title makes me wonder if there is more of a kind of a scored or temporal element to them as opposed to a more abstract invitation to think about sonic relationships.
Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, I'm really interested in open form. And so some of the scores have kind of rules, I say, I call them, and it's you follow certain processes that will lead you to a certain place. Others are they're kind of traditionally notated. They have a beginning, middle, and end. They're 5 systems,
Mm-hmm.
and you can pretty much follow them along. This is the score that the Mivos Quartet, I wrote them a piece,
Mm-hmm.
and they've just recorded an absolutely fabulous video of this piece, which is hopefully coming out next month. So,
Awesome.
um, so that's something to check out. But in that piece, it's all notated out in terms of the vertical synchronicities are important when everybody plays, and then the graphics indicate how you can interpret your own sounds that you're supposed to make during these times.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it's both. I'm very fascinated by both, and actually this new piece that I'm working on for Hypercube, this really great quartet in New York, we just had our first meeting, and in this piece, I think the graphic score is going to enter a much larger domain. So there's going to be some sections that are open with processes that have to be worked out, that have to be queued,
Mm-hmm.
that are listened to, and so forth. There are other sections that are going to be completely notated. And what's really exciting in this context is if somebody's doing something pretty strong, pretty clearly notated, while other people get to work in and out of that and play off of that in a very free way.
Mm. Are these so I'm getting the sense, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of these graphic scores are written with specific performers in mind. Is that the case or not?
It's so funny. It's not the case. I
Oh,
mean, there are about 50 scores now,
oh
and I
okay.
think the
That's a lot.
first 25 of them, well, most of them had no musicians in mind,
Mm.
except for the first few, which I worked with my group Neither Nor on.
Mm-hmm.
And then occasionally I would kind of write a piece thinking of a group that I had already worked with,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of mail them the score and say,
Uh,
I wrote you a piece. I hope you don't mind. Don't feel like you have to play it, but I totally thought of you. And so that's what happened with Mivos. We were
uh,
working on another piece, and I just sent them the score. I didn't tell them I was doing it, and they
uh,
were really wonderful about it and kind of put it together. But more recently, I started writing the pieces specifically. Like Lauren Colley, the violinist,
mm-hmm.
specifically asked me to write a violin piece for her,
I see.
and Hypercube, we're currently working on a piece. So this is a new era with these scores. I
Right.
feel like I went through the 2 years of kind of keeping it, developing the language on its own.
Mm-hmm.
Now I feel like I can interact with people.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I was also curious about the physical form of the scores because I noticed on your website that they're large format like prints. It says, and I
Right.
noticed a lot of color and
Right.
other kind of shapes. So like um, how do you create them? Like, are you like drawing them with pencil and paper? Is it digital? Are you making really large kind of charts? And like when they're performed, does it have to be paper? Can it be kind of like iPad? Or
Right.
what is the
Exactly.
relationship between the physical object of the graphic score and
Yeah.
performance?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, as we've gone to almost completely digital, with our musical scores, I just felt like I wanted to do something different. So they're all written by hand
Mm-hmm.
with just color, good quality ink, um, pens, and then what I do is I just physically make a copy of them, and
Oh,
I mail them to the musicians. So they're not really available in digital format.
I see.
And I guess my thought is, when the page is a certain size, you can see things a certain size. And if you reduce it too much,
Hmm.
it doesn't have the same effect. I mean,
Right.
some people have had to play them on iPads for certain
Hmm.
practical reasons, but ideally, I'll just mail you the score,
Oh.
and you'll have that score.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah. That's amazing. So it sounds like they're kind of, they are art objects in a certain sense. I mean, you can make a copy, but they are,
right.
the physicality is important. Yeah.
Well, I think it would be really cool. They're also, I think they're fun to watch while someone's playing them.
Mm,
So, if someone's performing it, I think it'd be really cool if the audience could see the score,
right.
have
Yeah.
their own version, or I
Cool.
don't know, in a gallery or something, the scores could be up while
Hmm.
somebody's playing it live.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
there's that kind of wonder and question that happens when you hear.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, hopefully with, advances. I mean, I could also, for better or for worse, like video and video presentations of music are now such a huge part of the performing landscape.
Yeah.
So combining the audiovisual image of a performance with the score. I mean, even though it's obviously kind of transgresses against the idea of the physical score being important, and the
Yeah.
size of it. Yeah, that could definitely be a possibility. Um, awesome. Well, thank you again so much for taking the time out to talk with me. This has been really great. It sounds like you are keeping really busy.
I think everyone's trying, and I was
Yeah.
just, like I said, I've just been fortunate to be able to kind of make some things happen, and
Yeah.
I'm glad you're doing well, and I hope your
Yeah.
listeners are as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
hopefully we'll kind of get through this pretty soon.
Hmm.
I'm in Massachusetts, things are pretty stable here right now. So we'll see.
Yes, God willing. Okay.
All right,
Well,
well, thanks, Ted.
yeah, thanks again. Have a great afternoon.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.